I've got the Arturia PolyBrute and the UDO Super 6 in the same room for one day only, so I thought I'd quickly go through the sonic characteristics of both synths and see what they sound like when you've got them next to each other. Fundamentally, these have been designed from completely different perspectives. The Super 6 has got this really vintage style interface. It hasn't even got an LED panel, whereas the Arturia, it's got the nice modern interface. You've got an app that links to it, and it's a bit like just using one of the Arturia apps. Actually, it's really well integrated with the synth itself. And although the Super 6 has got the vintage interface, it's actually got these super modern FPGA digital monitors, whereas the modern looking Arturia has got vintage style VCOs, so voltage controlled oscillators, so you couldn't get more vintage style with a more modern approach, and you couldn't get a more modern approach with a more vintage style. So I'll just go over the basic fundamentals of them first. The most unique aspect of the Arturia is this morph knob here. So each patch is essentially two patches, patch A and patch B, and they can be completely different, or you can just do subtle changes from one to the next. But if we look at the app, we can see that as a twist, the morph knob, we're twisting all those different parameters. So that's sort of unbelievably flexible and quite brilliant. Once you start playing with it, you realise quite how flexible that can be. And that sort of links up to this morphy block we've got here, which is a bit like a touche. And I won't go into detail about how that works here, I'll leave that for a separate review, but you've got three planes, X, Y and Z, and you can link those to the mod matrix or to the morph capabilities and all sorts of things. So you can hold it, you can just use it instantaneously like that. And essentially it's just a really fantastic performance tool. So between the morph knob and the morphy control, you've got all sorts of brilliant performance control in there. And then moving over to the Super 6, we've got this binaural mode. We'll just play a standard initial patch. And that's essentially two distinct synths, one playing through the left speaker and one playing through the right, and we get 6 voices in total. If we put it into normal standard poly mode or take it out of binaural mode, we get 12 voices. Six, 12. And in binaural mode, we have this super DDS mode. So you just get instant thickness. So brilliant for pads, and you also get those really nasty trans leads. And it's just so quick to get to those sort of sounds. But the Arturia is a lot more flexible from most standpoints. So if we start off with the oscillators, we've got 2 VCOs with a sub. On the Super 6, we've got 2 VCOs with a sub as well. But we do have LFO1, and that can go into this high frequency tracking mode, and that means it can be used as another oscillator, and it can also have access to all these digital waves. These oscillators are digital, as I said, but we do have access to all these PPG style waves. I'd call them digital waves, but they're all digital. Let's put a few of them on. So we just don't get those on the Arturia, but we do get these really nice VCOs. We can blend between a sawtooth and a triangle. And we've got pulses as well. So this is just pulse when it's all the way to the right, and then we've got the blend between the two of those with this knob here, but we've also got the pulse width. And you do have pulse width on the Super 6, but only on one of the oscillators. But we then have this metalizer. So by default, it only works on the triangle. But it gives us some really nice sort of sparkly tones. And if I press shift on this, I can change it to go to all the wave shapes. So not quite as different sounding for each of the wave shapes, but you can still get those sort of bright metallic sounds from the PolyBrute. And we've also got FM on both of them, with DDS2 on the Super 6 acting as the FM source and Oscillator 2 acting as the FM source on the PolyBrute, although we do have LFO1 as a modulation source on the Super 6, and that can act as an oscillator. So you see what I mean? We've got all sorts of differences, but generally 2 oscillators and a sub. So moving over to the filters then, we've got a single filter on the Super 6, whereas we've got 2 distinct separate filters, a Steiner-Parker and a ladder filter on the PolyBrute, although the VCF on the Super 6, and it is analog, not digital, even though the oscillators are digital, because you've got this binaural mode, you have actually got 2 separate VCFs, one for the left and one for the right, but with one set of controls, which makes it a bit weird, but you can do things like this. You can, let's just do a little bit of phase sweeping. So there we've got 2 filters, one on the left, one on the right, doing different things. That's not the filter sweeping from left to right, that's a filter on the left and a filter on the right, but you've only got limited access to how you can play with those filters. Whereas on the Arturia, you've got access to almost everything, and I tried to recreate something like that on the Arturia. And you can do that by using 2 LFOs, 2 separate filters, and putting them out of phase. So you can do the same thing on the Arturia. It's much more difficult to set up. The Super 6, it's one of its little tricks. The Arturia can do so many different tricks, but they do take a little bit more time to set up. That one took me a little bit to figure out and to get it sounding right. So I'll upload the patch to my Patreon page if I can. So if you remember there, you can see how I've done it and how it all works. So moving back to the filters then, because that's what we're talking about at the minute. We've got the Steiner-Parker and we've got the ladder on the Arturia. And we've got access to either the Steiner-Parker or the ladder for each of the VCOs using this button here. We've got orange, send it to the Steiner-Parker, green sends it to the ladder, and both sends it to both. But it's not as simple as that because we've got a series and parallel knob down here. So if you send it just to the Steiner-Parker and you've got it in series, it'll still come through the ladder. And what that basically means is that it's massively flexible. So, which everything is on the Arturia PolyBrute actually. So should we have a listen to the filters separately then? Let's start off with the filter on the Super 6. So quite aggressive that. It reminds me of an old Roland filter actually, and it gets some really, really nice juicy bass out of that. We've also got a high pass filter mode on this, but it just drops anything off below 500 Hertz. So it's really nice for unmuddying a mix. It's a bit like sticking a Juno on high pass filter mode 2, something like that. Then we've got a tracking mode, and that'll track the high pass. So it's more of a band pass. Well, it is a band pass. So although it seems not very flexible, it's actually got quite a lot in there. We've also got a couple of drive circuits. And I'm putting the resonance up high there because they sort of, a bit like a little bit of an overdrive circuit that kills the resonance. And you can hear there, can't you, that we're in binaural mode. We've got the two filters and they're slightly different. I need to calibrate it. And also bringing that drive in tends to not lose as much bass. Brings in a little bit more bass. And as you saw earlier, we've got access to LFO1 with that as well. And can modulate it with DDS2. And that's about it. And I say that's about it. Normally you'd be like, yeah, that's nice. There's lots and lots of things in there. But then you come over to the Arturia and I could be here for hours demoing everything this does. So I'm not going to go through everything on it. I'll do that, as I say, in another video. But this is the Steiner Parker. You don't lose any bass, and I really like this filter actually. I've got it on the Mini Brute. It's got the brute factor. And that's a bit like a feedback overdrive. So it's really aggressive, that gets some really nice fat tones. It's also state variable, this, from low pass to high pass to a band pass. So that seems pretty flexible on its own, but then we come down to the Moog ladder filter, or the Moog style ladder filter. So put this into the ladder filter, and now the Steiner Parker's not having any effect. But just to show you actually, if I had it on just the Steiner Parker, and I've got it in series, we're still accessing the ladder filter. Same with this, I'm putting it on the ladder filter now, but because we've got it in series, we're still listening to the Steiner Parker as well. I was doing something earlier and I honestly thought the cat was crying. Just checking that's not got any FM on it actually. Just lethal that, isn't it? Anyway, let's go back to the ladder. And that's got that familiar Moog style tone, hasn't it? But you'll notice we're not losing loads of bass like you do on a Moog. That really familiar sound, but I'm so impressed that they've taken the ladder filter and then they've just improved it really. Instead of just blindly copying. Anyway, let's go over to the parallel mode. Let's put VCO on through both of them. And then I'll move over to this little stereo knob here. We put it in stereo. You'll notice that one voice comes out of one speaker and another comes out of another. And you can control the amount of that spread, but the reason I'm showing this in the filter section is because if I press settings and give that a little wiggle, I can move it so it's the voice plus the filter being panned. And now we've got one coming through the left and one coming through the right. And we've got a master control of that as well. So as I was saying, the Super 6 doesn't feel inflexible when you're using it, but once you start playing with the PolyBrute, it's got so much more to offer. And let's have a look at the drive on the ladder filter as well. So just put it back into series, open the Steiner Parker, put it back into mono. And although that's only on the ladder filter, actually because you've got access to them both through series, anything coming through the Steiner Parker can also go through that drive circuit as well, depending on how you set it up. And that's one of the things with the PolyBrute, everything sort of depends how you set it up, it's that flexible. So that's the Steiner Parker filter going through the ladder filter distortion. So some nice tones coming from that, aren't there? Feel like I'm not giving the UDO enough love, but there's just more to look at on the Arturia. And a couple of the reviews I've done and I've compared different synths, people have actually complained to me that I've spent more time on one synth than another, a bit like a presidential debate, but it's just what I find to play with really while I'm doing this. But you can't argue that the Super 6 is as flexible or there's much to look at as there is on the PolyBrute here. Okay, over to the envelopes then on the Arturia. Again, it's more flexible. We've got 1, 2, 3 envelopes there. On this, we've got 2, but we've also got this LFO that acts a little bit like an ADR or an AR or an AD. Can't quite remember, depending on how you set it up. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 envelopes. But we've also got this little knob here that will record tweaks. So if I do, I don't know, if I record that, I'm going to play it back. So there you go, you can do whatever you like. You've only got access to one parameter at a time there, but if you ever find yourself playing something and you're doing the same thing, but it's something that's slightly more complex, a little bit like that you can't just naturally do with an envelope, that's a superb little addition. And we've got key tracking, on this via the mod matrix. On this, obviously, we've just got a very simple interface. As I say, this does have a much more vintage style, and this you've got a lot more going on under the hood. So we've done the envelopes. Let's move over to the LFOs. LFOs, 1, 2, 3. LFOs on this, we've got 1, 2. Although this does have the additional oscillator in it when we go into high frequency tracking mode. And on this, we've got the third oscillator here that acts like an envelope. So very much sort of swings and roundabouts. The 2 LFOs on this though aren't as flexible as the first 2 on this, in that the second envelope has only got a triangle, whereas this has got the full feature of all 7. We've got a phase on the LFO of 1 and we've got fade in on LFO 2. And the fade in, things like this are really nice actually when you start playing with the modulation, you're changing the fade in time and stuff, getting all sorts of little modular style effects. And the phase is how I did the sort of out of phase filter sweep earlier. So LFOs, again, I think the Arturia is on top, but it's not a competition what's best, it's what's best for you or what suits your needs best, I suppose. So let's move over to the modulation section. And again, on the modulation section, the Arturia is a bit more flexible than the Super 6. And it's not just more flexible against the Super 6. The Arturia is more flexible than pretty much any synth or any synth I can think of that's got VCOs. So we've got 16 modulation sources and everything can be a destination on the Super 6. On the PolyBrute, we've got 12 sources and we've got everything being a destination as well. But it's a little bit cleverer than that, in that if you set something up as a modulation routing, you can modulate the modulation routing itself. So if I go back to the patch I made earlier, I'm modulating the Steiner Parker with LFO1 and I'm modulating the ladder with LFO2, but I could modulate the amount of modulation with something else. So each of these become a destination themselves. So I could set up, where are we now? I could set up 6 as LFO1 as the destination. So we've got the amount of LFO1 and I could modulate the amount of LFO1 with, I don't know, the ribbon controller. So let's try that. So 6 with the ribbon controller. Let's turn the modulation of LFO1 down to start with. Let's turn up the amount of modulation from the ribbon controller. So the modulation on the Arturia gets really quite complex, and I think of it almost like a 3D matrix where you've got your top layer and then things modulating per layer, and all of a sudden you can get yourself really sort of mixed up in what you're doing. Imagine you've got a big modular system, you're trying to work out where all the cables are going, which is a good reason you've got the app, and on the app you can see what all the modulation sources and destinations are, plus the amount you've set. So that's really handy actually. The more complex things get, the more handy an app is to sort of get you out of trouble every now and then. But the Super 6 has got a little superpower in that each of its sources, so LFO2 for example, can modulate everything. There's no limitation. So how many have we got on here? Maybe 30, maybe 40 different parameters. LFO2 can modulate all of them. Whether that's any use, I don't know. In some instances, most definitely, but I don't think on either of them you're actually going to run out of destinations. So modulation, Arturia, again, more flexible. Really easy to set up on the Super 6 though as well. I'm going to assign LFO2 to the cross mod amount. So mod assign LFO2 cross mod. Change the amount, it can be positive or negative. And then when we play LFO2, we should effectively just be wiggling this. So really simple, but I can't modulate the amount I'm modulating that by, which you can on the Arturia. So that brings me over to the sequencers and arpeggiators, and I'm not going to show you how they work because I want to get to playing some sounds really, but they've both got 64-step sequencers. The Arturia has got 3 lanes of automation. The Super 6 hasn't got a lane of automation, but it has got a lane where you can assign the pitch bend, and the pitch bend you can assign to anything. So you've effectively got a single lane of modulation there as well. But the pitch bend negative and the pitch bend positive, you can assign to different things. So there are lots of things you can do from that, but it's not as flexible as 3 lanes of automation. You've effectively got 1 or maybe 2 split, depending on how you look at it. Okay then, let's start creating some tones, shall we? Because I think I've waffled on for long enough. So starting off with a basic sawtooth. Arturia sounds a bit brighter, and if we look at the frequency analysis, it definitely is. That's cutting off there, it's not quite getting to 20 kilohertz, is it? Whereas the Arturia is going higher. I don't think the Super 6 sounds dull in any way, I just think the Arturia is a bit brighter. Well, it is a bit brighter. And when I first started playing the Arturia, I did notice that actually. I thought it sounds a bit sparkly. It doesn't sound as vintage as I thought it was going to sound with the VCOs, but actually, you know, obviously you can tone that down however you like. But when we play two notes, we're locked on there. We're not quite there. And when I started messing around with tones, I noticed that the Super 6 just sounds a little bit more precise. Obviously it's digital, but it does have its slot mode. And instantly it sounds just as rich. So the fact that these are digital oscillators doesn't bother me in the slightest actually. It'd be quite nice if the Arturia had some digital oscillators in there, a bit like the Minilog XD does. That's got two oscillators, I think, and a sub, and it's got the digital oscillators as well, so. So from a rich analog perspective, they can both sound pretty similar. Let's, I mean, I'm not trying to make them sound the same, just trying to get an overall feel for the characters. So maybe let's have a little play with the filter on that, shall we? What I'm finding amazing about both of these at the minute is there's no reverb on either of them, and this is only a single oscillator and no sub playing, and they're so nice, aren't they? So let's try and thicken them up then. Let's add a second oscillator. And you'll notice here on the Super 6 that we've got just the mixer, the blend between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, whereas on Arturia we've got completely separate controls of the noise, VCO1 and VCO2, but we don't have on the Arturia an input for an external signal, which we do have on the Super 6. So I'm really impressed by both of them actually. Let's add a sub. On the Super 6, if we go to the sub oscillator, we need to be in LFO mode. So actually what's quite interesting there is that you feel like you are getting a little bit more character from the Super 6 just because of its limitations. We can add a second oscillator there. We can use LFO1 as a second oscillator, and then we can detune that slightly from oscillator 1, and we can have that plus the sub. I'll have a little go at that. So yeah, it's possible. What I did there is I put LFO1 on high frequency mode. I then made it into a sawtooth using shift and clicking it back and forth, detuned it slightly, and then put DDS2 onto an LFO and brought in the sub. So we've got an oscillator from DDS1, we've got an oscillator from LFO1, both slightly detuned, and then the sub from oscillator 2. So a bit convoluted, but but we got there in the end. Let's try a little bit of cross mod. So we're actually only getting about, what's that, just under 50% of the cross mod you get on the Super 6 on the Arturia. So we're getting a lot more sparkle out of the Super 6 than we are out of the PolyBrute on that one. So that's a rare win from flexibility from the Super 6 perspective. Let's move over to some of the effects and have a quick listen to some of them. That stays well under control, doesn't it? We're not getting any of that Roland Space Echo style madness. Let's see what we get on the Arturia, and it's going to be more flexible. Let's just start off from there, shall we? So we are moving into self-oscillation there. So it's got a BBD, Bucket Brigade delay, then it's got ping pong, and then we've got a whole list of other things. We've got stereo, long delay, Bucket Brigade delay, ping pong, we've got car plus, stereo spread, parallel, and BBD spread, so a fair few there. So that's much more of a sound designer's tool, isn't it, than the Super 6, which is giving just a nice little bit of delay to your performance. The Arturia is actually something you will build in to your patches as well. And don't forget, they've got lots of experience making effects with the plugins, so really quite cool. And they've got the reverb as well. Let's turn the delay down, add some reverb. And I think that's pretty fabulous, isn't it? Got lots of different types in here as well. We've got bright plate, room, dreamy. I'm not going to go through them all. Let's just have a little play with one of them, shall we? Dreamy, let's see what dreamy does. It's a bit of a shimmer style thing, isn't it? And I should really show what the Super 6 can do that the Arturia can't. But that really all lies within those wave shapes we heard at the very start. So if we play a patch with wave shape in wave shapes, digital wave shapes, whatever you want to call them. I'm sure, given time, I could sit there with the Arturia and get something quite close. But it wouldn't be exactly the same, would it? But with the Arturia, there's lots of stuff I can do that I can't do on the Super 6. So after playing with them for, well, a couple of days now, really, what are my final thoughts on this? Really interesting that they're both about the same price. They're both very expensive synths, and they've taken a completely different outlook to the design. As I said at the start, the Arturia has got a vintage VCO styles. Well, they are VCOs, but it's just so modern, and it really does feel like it fits in with the whole Arturia family. The knobs look like my mini Brute that I got years and years ago, but I was so shocked how good quality this is. Not that the mini Brute's bad or anything, but this was just, oh wow. You get it out of the box, you're like, now that's a synth. The Super 6, I got out the box and I'm instantly in love with the look and the feel of it, and the way it acts, the way it sounds. It's just got a really nice vintage style interface. It could do with an LED panel. At times you think it would be useful, but generally not really. But what would be really useful for the Super 6 is an editor, because you're not quite sure what's happening where, whereas with the Arturia you really can dig into the editor and know exactly what's happening. But which would be for you? Well, I think the Arturia really does feel like the centerpiece flagship synth of your studio. So if you've not got a Poly, or you've only got one or two synths, and you get this, it's covering all sorts of bases, to be honest. I'm looking at it now thinking, do I get rid of my, I don't want to get rid of my Prophet 5, but I wish I'd bought a Prophet 10. And actually looking at the Arturia, ooh, you know what? I'll put it up against the Prophet 5 and see how it fares. But it's just got a real nice feel and quality about it, and it can do so many things. I've not touched the surface of all the various options on this, but that does get a little bit confusing in a short video. But the Super 6, I really like this as well, and this feels like something that you've got a few synths like I have, then you get, ooh, that one, oh, that's an interesting synth. It comes across as being interesting, different, something that you don't already have. It's just got a real nice quality and a nice character to it. But you might have it as your first synth. You might have loads of soft synths and you think, I want something just a bit different that I can't do on anything. And actually the Super 6 just comes from a different perspective. But the Arturia, again, much more flexible. So a really difficult decision if you were thinking of buying one of them. And I have to say, I'm glad the studio is full at the minute and I haven't got space for any more. 5 octaves versus 4 octaves doesn't actually bother me. When I played in a band, I sort of stopped using my left hand. I usually have a little noodle round, but you stop using your left hand in the studio because I've got bass lines for that. So I don't need big spreads. It just muddies a mix. So I tend to only play a synth over a couple of octaves or 3 or 4 octaves. It's nice to have, don't get me wrong, it's really nice to have the 5 octaves. Doesn't bother me that it hasn't got it. For if you're a player and you go out and you're doing all this, the Arturia obviously is preferable to something with 4 octaves. But 4 octaves, again, I'm talking about space, you know, it fits in more rooms. So I'm really impressed with both of them, and I can't wait to dig in a little bit more to the Arturia. I'll be sad, I mean, they're both on loan, I'll be sad to see both of them go, put it that way. They are really nice. You can see people have put a lot of time and effort and thought into both of these, which is really important. You don't feel like you're getting fleeced by either of them. Actually, they feel like they've put the effort in and they're worth what they're asking, which is really important as well. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and if it was, please think about subscribing, ringing that bell, and maybe pop over to my Patreon page, join me there. It all helps to support the channel, and you'll get a few extra patches. You get access to all my videos demonstrating how to get the most out of your synths as well. So I will see you next time.